The British were, without a doubt, the class pranksters of the Second World War, using various forms of deception, such as dummy parachutists and dummy tanks, and vexation, such as itching powder and laxatives, to confuse and whittle down their enemies. While the outcomes of some British pranks were a little more pronounced, it's a little unclear how one of the more disturbing deceptions of the war affected its outcome. In this video, we take a look at Operation Mincemeat and the man who never was. From October 1940 to April 1941, Hitler did what Mussolini could not and captured Greece. The German occupation was brutal, resulting in the deaths of tens of thousands of Greeks and the ruination of Greece's economy. In 1943, the Allies geared up to invade the Italian island of Sardinia, Greece, and the Balkans, but not really. What they really wanted to do was take Sicily, but Hitler and Mussolini didn't need to know about this. In fact, the Allies made it their mission to trick the Axis into thinking Allied invasions of Sardinia, Greece, and the Balkans were on their way. On a whole, this deception was known as Operation Barclay, and while the Allies undertook a variety of other ruses under Operation Barclay, the British ruse, known as Operation Mincemeat, is what we're focusing on today. But just what was Operation Mincemeat? In 1939, British Royal Navy Rear Admiral John Godfrey, Director of Naval Intelligence, wrote a paper which likened wartime deception to, of all things, fly fishing. But this very paper, deemed the Trout Memo, may have been a deception in of itself, having possibly been written by Godfrey's assistant Ian Fleming instead, with Godfrey taking the credit. If the name Ian Fleming sounds familiar to you, it's very likely because Fleming was the bloke who wrote the James Bond series. Within the Trout Memo, Godfrey or Fleming, who even knows, made one rather grim yet clever suggestion. While by no means an original concept, suggestion number 28 of the Trout Memo stated, a corpse dressed as an airman with dispatches in his pockets could be dropped on the coast, supposedly from a parachute that has failed. Of course, it would have to be a fresh corpse. Taking inspiration from suggestion 28, as well as from similar occurrences in the Great War and World War II, a British MI5 intelligence officer by the name of Charles Cholmondeley conceived a plan. He would dress a corpse up looking like a British officer, fill his pockets with documents pertaining to fictitious Allied invasions of Sardinia, Greece, and the Balkans, and dump him somewhere where he'd end up in Axis hands, all to divert Hitler and Mussolini from the true invasion site, which was Sicily. Comprehending the plan's potential, the Royal Navy assigned Naval Intelligence Officer Ewan Montagu, who had worked with our buddy Godfrey before, to Cholmondeley, and together they ironed out the kinks. Basically, they had to figure out whose corpse they would use, whom they would make the corpse out to be, which documents they would stuff in the corpse's pockets, and how and where they would dump the corpse. This is when it got a little disturbing, if a little sad. The corpse they selected had belonged to a Welsh homeless man named Glendo Michael, who, after both his parents were dead, became a homeless man on the streets of London. Starving, or possibly in an attempt to take his own life, Michael ate rat poison in an abandoned warehouse at age 34 and died in hospital 2 days later. While that was bad news for Michael, it was good news for the Allies. Cholmondeley and Montagu put their minds to creating an entirely fictitious identity for the corpse. Seemingly overnight, a homeless Welshman became William Martin of the Royal Marines, the man who never was. Martin was placed in a battle dress and various effects were attached to his person. These included, but were not limited to, a naval identity card, a photo of and love letters from his fictitious fiancée, and a pass from a nightclub in London. While those items reinforced Martin's identity, there were, of course, the false military documents themselves. Several important deception documents were placed in a briefcase attached to Martin with a chain, one being a letter from British General Archibald Nye to British General Harold Alexander. Rather than just stating, "We're gonna hit up Greece and totally not Sicily, lol," our prankster duo made use of their wit, alluding to the fictitious invasion in a less direct manner. A portion of the letter read, "We have recent information that the Germans have been reinforcing and strengthening their defenses in Greece and Crete, and Chief of the Imperial General Staff felt that our forces for the assault were insufficient." Another fictitious letter, addressed to British Admiral Andrew Cunningham from British Vice Admiral Louis Mountbatten, hinted at an Allied invasion of Sardinia while also putting it out there that Martin was an expert on amphibious warfare. All Cholmondeley and Montigny had to figure out now was how and where to dump Martin. It was decided they would make it seem as if he had been the victim of a plane crash, and they intended for him to wash up on the shore of Huelva in southern Spain, where the tides and currents were predictable and where they knew a German Abwehr agent was active. Instead of actually crashing a plane with Martin inside of it, or instead of dumping him from a moving plane, they put him in a sealed canister inside the Royal Navy sub HMS Seraph, which was bombed twice on its way to the delivery point. When the HMS Seraph finally and safely arrived off the Spanish coast on the 29th of April 1943, Martin was pushed into the water. The success of Operation Mincemeat was now in fate's hands. A day later, a Spanish fisherman spotted something strange on the coastline. After the fisherman notified the authorities, the corpse and its effects ended up with the Spanish military, though a British vice consul living in the city was able to notify the British that their package had arrived as planned. The vice consul even attended the autopsy, at which William Martin of the Royal Marines was deemed to have died at sea. He was buried in Huelva, but his personal effects ended up in Madrid. The Spanish military held on tightly to the briefcase for a while, but was ultimately persuaded to let German Abwehr agents operating in the area open it and see its contents. The information reached Germany on the 8th of May 1943, soon after which Allied command received a message which read, "Mincemeat swallowed rod, line and sinker by the right people, and they look like they're acting on it." And act on it, the Germans did. On the 14th of May, German Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz wrote, "The Führer does not agree with Mussolini that the most likely invasion point is Sicily. He believes that the discovered British order confirms the assumption that the planned attacks will be directed mainly against Greece." In preparation, Hitler bolstered his forces in the Mediterranean, doubling his infantry might in Sardinia to 10,000, transferring fighter aircraft from Sicily to Sardinia, transferring 7 infantry divisions to Greece, relocating torpedo boats from Sicily to Greece, and relocating 10 infantry divisions and 2 panzer divisions to the Balkans. On the 9th of July 1943, the Allies invaded Sicily. By the 17th of August, the island was in Allied control. Mussolini's regime was history. Though, while the Allies had dealt the Axis a defeat, it's unclear exactly how much Operation Mincemeat influenced Hitler's decision to bolster Sardinia, Greece, and the Balkans. Hitler had feared an invasion of the Balkans prior to Mincemeat, and he wasn't all too trusting in Mussolini and Italy's ability at this point in the war anyway. What we can say for sure is that the Allies copped a whole lot less hurt than they had expected to, with a campaign they expected to last 90 days, taking just 38 days in reality. In the words of British historian Ben McIntyre, of the 160,000 Allied soldiers who took part in the invasion and conquest of Sicily, more than 153,000 were still alive at the end. That so many survived was due, in no small measure, to a man who died 7 months earlier. But we're interested to hear what you think. Had you heard of Operation Mincemeat and the man who never was before today? Would you say it was one of the greatest deceptions of the Second World War or one of the greatest blunders? And lastly, do you think it had a significant effect on the outcome of the war? As always guys, please share your thoughts in the comment section below. And also guys, just before you head off to those suggested videos, if you want to hear some more interesting stories, but this time about badasses from all different eras of history, not just World War II, make sure you check out our new channel called The Braved. It's the first link in the description below. Real high quality videos once a week. And if you just want to jam out to some music, check out our Relax Jack music channel where we use a lot of the tracks there on this channel too. And if you just want to vibe in our wider community, check us out on our Discord, Facebook, and Instagram. All of these links are in the description below. Anyways guys, as always, thank you so much for watching and I hope you learned something new.